300 trains, billions of dollars in cargo. All of it frozen solid at a European border crossing. No earthquake, no war declaration, no system failure. Just one government making one decision in a matter of hours. And overnight, the most important trade route between China and Europe went completely dark. What you're about to find out is why it happened, and what China quietly had waiting in the wings. There is a railway system that most people have never heard of, and yet it moves the goods that quietly shape their daily lives. The shirt on your back, the car parts in the vehicle you drive, the solar panel on your neighbor's roof. There's a good chance some piece of that supply chain traveled on what insiders call the Iron Silk Road, the China-Europe freight train network. A steel corridor stretching from the factory floors of central China all the way to the port cities of Western Europe. 25 countries, 227 cities, and more than 110,000 train services completed since the very first locomotive made the journey back in 2011. The total value of goods that have moved along this network? Over 450 billion US dollars. So when Poland, the country that sits at the very gateway of Europe on this route, suddenly shut down every single border crossing with Belarus in the autumn of 2024, the consequences were immediate and staggering. More than 300 freight trains stalled, tens of thousands of containers piled up with nowhere to go. Cross-border shipments worth $320 million froze mid-delivery. And trade analysts warned that if it continued, up to 25 billion euros in China-Europe, commerce could seize up entirely. The world's most ambitious trade corridor had just been switched off like a light. But here's what most people missed. China already had a backup plan. 3 of them, actually. And the moves China made in response to Poland's decision may end up permanently redrawing the map of how goods travel between Asia and Europe. This is that story. Part 1. How the Iron Silk Road was born. To understand why Poland's closure hit so hard, you first need to grasp just how central this network had become to global trade. Go back to 2011. A single freight train departs from Chongqing, a sprawling industrial city in China's southwest, and heads west toward Duisburg, Germany. 11,000 kilometers, 16 days. At the time, it was seen as a bold experiment, moving cargo across Eurasia by rail, in a way nobody had seriously attempted at this scale before. 2 years later, in 2013, China formalized the vision. President Xi Jinping launched the Belt and Road Initiative, an infrastructure and investment program spanning continents, with the China-Europe freight train as its most visible and commercially ready centerpiece. The network grew fast. New departure cities, new destination hubs, new rail lines upgraded to carry heavier loads. By late 2024, the numbers told a remarkable story. Over 100,000 train services completed, more than 11 million containers transported. The longest route, stretching all the way to Madrid, Spain, covers 13,900 kilometers. A journey that would take around 20 days. On a map, the network looks like a dense spiderweb, tightly connecting China to the heart of Europe. And at the center of that web, controlling the single most critical entry point into the EU, sat Poland. Part 2. Why Poland became the gatekeeper. Geography, as the saying goes, is destiny. And for Poland, that has never been more true than right now. Every China-Europe freight train traveling the main northern corridor must cross from Belarus into Poland. That's not a preference. That's physics. Poland is the first EU country on the eastern land approach. And right at the border, at a logistics terminal called Małaszewicze, every single one of those trains must stop. Here's why. China, Russia, and the former Soviet states use a wider rail gauge. The tracks are spaced 1,520 millimeters apart. Most of Europe runs on 1,435 millimeters. That 85 millimeter gap means containers must be physically transferred from one set of wagons to another before a train can continue westward. Małaszewicze is where that transfer happens, for roughly 350,000 containers every year. The numbers are extraordinary. Around 90% of all China-Europe freight trains pass through Polish territory. 90%. That near-total dependency gave Warsaw structural power that few countries in the world enjoy over a major global trade route. Poland leaned into that advantage. Polish logistics companies thrived. The terminal at Małaszewicze became one of the busiest freight hubs on the continent. Polish farmers, particularly dairy producers, discovered a booming new export market in China, with butter and cheese exports growing by 78% after the freight trains opened the route. The relationship worked, but it always carried a hidden risk, one that autumn of 2024 exposed in the most dramatic way possible. Part 3: The Shutdown and the Reason Behind It. Around September 10th, 2024, more than 20 Russian-made military drones, originally deployed in the war in Ukraine, strayed into Polish airspace. Polish air defenses scrambled, and the drones were intercepted. There was no major damage, but for a country sitting right on NATO's eastern flank, sharing borders with both Russia and Belarus, this wasn't just some minor incident. It was, honestly, a serious provocation. Then, something even more unsettling happened. Russia and Belarus announced a massive joint military exercise near the Polish border. Nearly 100,000 troops, including drills simulating nuclear strikes. For Warsaw, the message was, well, unmistakable. Your eastern border is exposed, and Russia wants you to know it. Poland's response was immediate. Within 24 hours of the exercise announcement, Warsaw closed every border crossing with Belarus. Road and rail, all of it, shut down. The official reason? The safety of Polish citizens. What followed was an economic shockwave that rippled across 2 continents. In less than a week, more than 300 China-Europe freight trains were brought to a halt. Electronics heading to German retailers, auto parts destined for factories in Central Europe, solar panels ordered by energy companies in France, all of it stuck. The Małaszewicze terminal went quiet, cranes idle, warehouses full. More than 20 major logistics operators in the region suspended operations. The financial bleeding was running at an estimated $12 million a day, just in loading and warehousing losses alone. But here's where things get more complicated, and honestly, more interesting. The security threat was real, sure, but the timing of Poland's decision wasn't accidental. At exactly this moment, Warsaw had submitted a request to the European Union for a €40 billion defense subsidy to reinforce its eastern flank. Closing all border crossings with Belarus, dramatically, publicly, in a way that drew international attention, made an extremely compelling visual argument for why Poland needed that money. Polish officials have never said the freight shutdown was political theater, but the timing is something you simply can't ignore. And it raises a question that trade analysts have been quietly wrestling with ever since. When a country uses its geographic stranglehold over a critical trade route as a geopolitical lever, even with legitimate security justifications, what are the long-term consequences? It wasn't until September 25th that Poland finally reopened its border crossings. 2 weeks. The trains started moving again. The containers cleared, but the relationship between Poland and the rest of the China-Europe corridor would never quite be the same. Part 4. China's 3 backup routes. Here's something that Beijing had understood long before September 2024. Relying on any single corridor, and especially any single country, for 90% of your flagship trade route is, honestly, a vulnerability. A strategic weakness hiding inside an economic success story. So, while the northern line through Belarus and Poland was growing and thriving, Chinese planners were quietly, systematically developing alternatives. And when Poland shut its borders, those alternatives suddenly became very real, very fast. The first backup, the Arctic Passage. In June 2025, China and Russia reached a significant breakthrough in cooperation along what's known as the Northern Sea Route, the Arctic shipping corridor that runs along Russia's coastline, connecting Pacific ports to Atlantic ones through waters that, climate change has been gradually opening up. A cargo vessel departing from Ningbo, one of China's major southern ports, would call at Qingdao and Shanghai, then navigate north through the Arctic and west across to Europe, arriving at Felixstowe in the United Kingdom before continuing to Rotterdam, Hamburg, and ultimately Gdansk in Poland. Total journey time, just 18 days. 18 days by sea through the Arctic. That's roughly half the transit time of traditional ocean shipping routes through the Suez Canal. For logistics operators, that kind of time saving is extraordinary. And while the Arctic route still needs further infrastructure investment before it can operate year-round at scale, the direction of travel is, well, unmistakable. This isn't some distant theoretical option. It's actively being developed right now. The second backup, the Middle Corridor. This is the route that saw immediate real-world activation during the September 2024 crisis. Formerly known as the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, the Middle Corridor takes a path through Central Asia and the Caucasus that avoids Russia and Belarus entirely. A train leaves China and heads west into Kazakhstan, arriving at the Caspian Sea port of Aktau. From there, cargo crosses the Caspian by ferry to Baku in Azerbaijan, then by rail through Georgia and Turkey, eventually connecting to the European network. Yeah, it's more complex than the Northern Line. More modal transfers, more border crossings, more moving parts. But it completely bypasses sanctioned territory, which has made it enormously attractive to European importers who are nervous about routing goods through Russia. During the September 2024 closure, the Middle Corridor handled goods worth over $45 million in a single day at its peak. In the first 3 quarters of 2025, 229 train services used the route. That's 28 times more than the same period the year before. Its market share in China-Europe freight has climbed to around 15% of total volume. And within 2 years, its annual capacity is set to reach 10 million tons. The Middle Corridor isn't just a backup anymore. It's becoming a second main artery. The third backup, the CKU Railway. The third alternative is still under construction, but may ultimately be the most consequential of all. The China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, or CKU Railway, is a new 523-kilometer line starting from Kashgar in China's Xinjiang region, crossing through Kyrgyzstan, and ending in Uzbekistan. By April 2025, construction had officially begun. Completion is scheduled for 2031. This route bypasses Russia. It bypasses Belarus. It bypasses Poland entirely. And compared to the Northern Corridor, it cuts transport distance by roughly 900 kilometers, saving 7 to 8 transit days and reducing logistics costs by more than 30%. Once operational, analysts project it will divert around 30% of current China-Europe freight away from the Northern Line. 30%. That's not a marginal shift. That's a structural transformation. Part 5. The numbers don't lie. Step back and look at what's actually happening in the data because, honestly, the trend lines tell a story that's hard to argue with. Traffic on the southern routes, the Middle Corridor and its connected networks, grew by 127% year over year following the September 2024 disruption. Their combined market share in China-Europe freight climbed from 18% to 31% in the space of a single year. Meanwhile, Poland's share of the total corridor is projected to fall by 15%. Now, 15% might sound modest, but for the Małaszewicze terminal, which processes hundreds of thousands of containers annually, a 15% decline means real job losses, reduced revenue for logistics companies, lower tax income for local governments, and, critically, a steady erosion of the geographic leverage Poland has used to position itself as the indispensable gateway between China and Europe. Every week, the middle corridor operates successfully. More shippers get comfortable with it. Every ton of capacity added to the CKU railway is a ton that will never need to pass through Poland. And every new Arctic voyage proves the viability of a sea route that bypasses the entire overland network. This is how geographic monopolies end, not with a single dramatic rupture, but with a slow, steady redistribution of traffic, driven by the rational decisions of thousands of individual businesses seeking security, reliability, and cost efficiency. Poland had leverage. It still has leverage. But that leverage is being competed away in real time, route by route, container by container. Part 6. Why this matters to ordinary people. It's easy to get lost in the geopolitics and the logistics data and, honestly, forget what this is actually about. So let's bring it back to earth. Think about a dairy farmer in central Poland who grows her herd specifically to meet the increasing demand from Chinese consumers. Before the freight trains opened this route, Chinese buyers were simply inaccessible. The shelf life of fresh dairy products couldn't survive a 45-day sea voyage. Now the trains deliver her butter and aged cheese to Shanghai within 15 days. Her exports to China grew 78% in the years after the route opened. Her farm expanded. She hired 3 more workers. When Poland shut the border for 2 weeks, her scheduled shipment sat in a refrigerated container at a warehouse in Małaszewicze. That's her income, her livelihood, her workers' wages. Now think about a small electronics retailer in Leipzig, Germany, who sources components from Chinese suppliers via the freight trains because it's faster than ocean shipping and cheaper than air freight. When the train stopped, her inventory drained. Her customers kept ordering. Her competitors, sourcing locally at higher cost, quietly gained market share. These are the people behind the statistics, and across the entire Eurasian corridor, from factory workers in Guangdong to logistics coordinators in Warsaw to shopkeepers in Paris. The China-Europe freight network touches millions of livelihoods that most people never think about until the system breaks. That's exactly why the EU Supply Chain Monitoring Center's warning that a prolonged blockade could freeze 25 billion euros in trade wasn't hyperbole. It was a precise assessment of just how deeply integrated these supply chains have become and how quickly that integration can become a liability when the political winds shift. Part 7. The deeper question: who controls the new Silk Road? There's a pattern in the history of global trade that's worth understanding because it's playing out right now, in real time, along the China-Europe corridor. Every major trade choke point in history, the Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, has given the country or power that controls it enormous leverage. And every single one of those choke points, over time, has either been bypassed, duplicated, or had its leverage neutralized by the relentless pressure of economic incentive. Poland understood it had a choke point, and for years it leveraged that position effectively, attracting investment, building terminal capacity, becoming the indispensable eastern gateway of the EU. That was smart strategy. But September 2024 revealed the risk that comes with using a trade choke point as a political instrument. The moment you demonstrate that you are willing, for whatever reason, however legitimate, to switch off the flow of goods, you send a signal to every shipper, every logistics planner, and every government along the route. This corridor is not reliable. And unreliability in trade is perhaps the most expensive reputation you can acquire. China heard that signal, and its response has been methodical, well-funded, and clearly strategic. 3 alternative corridors, each at different stages of development, each designed to reduce the single-country dependency that September 2024 exposed so vividly. The question now isn't whether these alternatives will grow. They are already growing. The question is how Poland responds, and whether it chooses to be the most reliable gateway in Eurasia or the most unpredictable one. Closing. More than 2,000 years ago, the original Silk Road didn't have a single owner. It was a network, adaptive, resilient, constantly finding new paths around old obstacles. When one city fell, another rose. When one pass became impassable, merchants found another route. The road always moved, because trade always finds a way. The modern Iron Silk Road is beginning to behave exactly the same way. Poland's September 2024 border closure was resolved within weeks. The trains moved again. Business resumed. But what it set in motion, the acceleration of the Middle Corridor, the emergence of Arctic shipping, the construction of the CKU Railway. Those aren't temporary responses to a temporary disruption. They are the early stages of a fundamental restructuring of how goods travel between the world's two largest economic regions. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from this entire story. In an era of geopolitical tension, trade sanctions, and military posturing, the corridors that will define the next century of global commerce won't necessarily be the shortest ones or the oldest ones. They'll be the reliable ones, the open ones, the ones that keep moving, regardless of who is trying to stop them. The Iron Silk Road is being rewired, and the world is watching to see exactly which path it chooses. If this story made you see the world a little differently, if you caught yourself thinking about supply chains, trade routes, and the invisible systems that connect your life to factories and farms 10,000 kilometers away, then you're asking exactly the right questions. That's what we do here. We dig into the stories behind the headlines, the economic forces, the infrastructure decisions, and the geopolitical moves that most people never see coming, until they already feel the impact. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Because the stories we cover here, the ports being built, the railways under construction, the trade corridors shifting beneath the surface, these aren't just news. They're the blueprint for what the world is going to look like 10 years from now. And the people who understand them earliest are always the ones who see it coming. We'll see you in the next one.